Welcome to our podcast, This Life, the Chronicles of Autism Moms. I'm Alison and I'm joined each week by amazing women who happen to have children on the spectrum. We talk about navigating the ups and downs of parenting kids with autism and how that affected us and our lives as women, professionals and mothers. Strap in, grab some tissues. Sometimes you'll cry from empathy and others from laughter. Join us on our journey of this life. Welcome to today's episode, Social Interactions. I'm Alison and today I am joined by Suzana, Maha and Hasna. Welcome,
Hi,
ladies.
Alison. How are you? We're so excited to be here.
We are excited, very excited to be all together in one place.
In person, yay.
So today we're going to be talking about social interactions, and I know that we all have our own anxiety about social interactions with our children. So I'll just start off with you, Suzana, and just to kind of introduce the topic and really to talk about what your experiences are of having uncomfortable social interactions with your son and in different environments and what that kind of looked for you in the past.
Yeah. So my son is almost 10 years old right now. So it's been a long journey and lots of differences from the time he was a toddler until now. I think the most stressful social interaction time was when he was a toddler, because he still wasn't speaking probably properly with the speech delay and all that, and he has always been very eager to actually socialize. So it wasn't really ever the issue of like not wanting to be around people, but it was more of like, how do I interact with people? So I remember at one point, like, his issue in our compound was always wanting to play with all the other kids, and a lot of them were a bit older, and they would assume that he speaks well and everything. So because he can't communicate, he would like run over, take their toy, for example, and run off so they can chase him. And like for him, like that's him socializing and playing. But like for them, then they would get upset because he took their toy and all of that. So it was always like, there was that anxiety because you always need to be like around, paying attention and trying to analyze like, what is he doing? How can I use this as a learning opportunity to like teach him what to do? And also to kind of like absorb any, upset feelings that others.
Actually quite exhausting.
It is exhausting.
Yeah. So you just remember the sheer exhaustion.
Like I remember
like the sweating.
Yes, definitely. Right. Because what's like the alternative? Just like not allow him to be around other kids? Like he has to learn at one point. Yeah. And I think as we like, as he's growing, I think at one point, as he was, developing his speech skills, there were a lot of times where he would get like frustrated about situations with other kids where he can then not really express himself well. And then at that point, I remember us focusing on teaching him to tell the adult that's around. So that served us for quite a few years because then we would help him navigate the situation. But now we're at an age, since like about a year or so ago, and I really noticed this especially with like my friends' kids who are in similar age groups, where then something would happen and he usually just goes off to whoever's mom is like, your son did blah, 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 whatever, or, he'll just tell them off. And then immediately the moms will go deal with their kids, which was fine, when he was a bit younger. But now the kids are getting annoyed with that kind of behavior. So, and then, they'll, kind of threaten him with, well, if you tell on us, then we're going to do this or, that whole situation. So then he got to a point where he's scared to say anything. And I'd always kind of talk to him like, if you're having a difficult time, like you don't need to go tell off their moms. Just come talk to me privately and I'll help you figure out how to like navigate that. So,
and what was the reaction from your perspective from the mums? Was there any kind of fallout with the parents because of that?
Honestly, no, because they're like very, very good friends of mine, but it does get embarrassing sometimes. Like they think it's funny and they laugh it off. But I think sometimes like it gets to a point where it's like, that's a bit rude. You shouldn't have said that,
right.
Yeah.
Okay.
When is it enough?
But no, nobody has ever reacted because like usually it's not like with random strangers. It's like with people that he really knows well.
Okay, so that leads me on to my next question actually. Maha, perhaps you can share some information about this. The anxiety And I think it's fair to say that at some point we've all had anxiety about our kids having social interactions, really probably because we don't really know what to expect. It's always a surprise. They might react in certain situations.
That's right.
Has that ever become so overwhelming for you as a parent, not for him, but for you, that you have decided to navigate yourself around a social situation and just decided that you're not going to participate in something? How has that affected you, how Zane might react in a certain situation?
That has definitely happened a lot, where I've not attended certain big birthday parties, or when there's a lot of kids, because he does find it very overwhelming. And then I'm trying to help him, but I'm trying to help him when he's at a state where he can't actually learn anything because he is so overwhelmed. So I really need to pick and choose the right social setting. Sometimes I do find that I maybe remove myself a bit too much, where I need to sometimes lean into the discomfort and say, well, he's just, the more exposed he is, the more he'll get used to it. He's 12 years old now, so we are reaching a time where, just as going into his preteen, he will be pulling away, because that's what kids do at that age. They want to be by themselves. They don't want to be so social, I guess. But yeah, I definitely have to get myself into a good state before I go into these situations, because like you said, you don't know what you're going to expect, and your child picks up on your anxiety. So when you go in there stressed, especially with my son, he is more probably concerned now that I'm going to get stressed and upset, and he can tell without me even saying anything. So I sort of owe it to him to sort of put myself in the right mindset before going in. Otherwise, I'll, if it's a bad day for me, I'm comfortable with saying, you know what, it's okay for us not to, we can sit this one out. He's more than happy to sit it out. I don't put that pressure on myself.
That's the thing, the kids don't necessarily care. It's more about what you feel that you should be doing, how you develop their social skills if they're not going to be around people.
Yeah. I think you just kind of like have to make an effort, a conscious effort to maybe set up almost like social situations that that are most likely going to be successful experiences for them, where you go in with the mentality of this is for learning purposes, and depending on what skill you want to like teach, like maybe even know how you're going to react to different, or respond to different situations, and then kind of like follow through with that, even if that means like, let's say you're working on making sure your seatbelt is buckled on the way to wherever. And if you don't, buckle your seatbelt, you're gonna stop the car or go back. You're not gonna have this outing. Like just kind of like that sort of situation. Just set it up like where maybe it's at a time where you're not, anxious about getting somewhere on time or whatsoever, where you
don't care if you go or not.
Exactly, right. Where you can just actually do that consequence that you need to do.
And you have all the patience in the world. The day that you have patience.
The day that you have patience.
One day
that's
that you want to even teach anything. Sometimes I'm just like, I'm
we just got to
get
through.
I'm like, I'm going to go, I'm going to let him mess up, but I'm just going to be
honestly,
really patient.
I will admit that I'm the guilty mom, where when I'm going into something and I know there might be some difficult situation and I don't want to deal with it, I'm just gonna get I go. Okay. If it depends who it is, but I go and I just get my iPad. That's the silent babysitter. Sometimes he's still around kids, even if
it's a good backup.
Yeah, and then if he wants to socialize, he'll socialize as much as he's comfortable with, and when he's done and needs his time, he'll just have that to kind of tap out.
I think that's a really good judge, because otherwise then if you're there socially as well, then at least it doesn't ruin your time. What about you, Hasna? We've all done the iPads, we've all done the phones, we've all done everything.
My son is he's actually turning 15, so he actually wants social interactions. He's always he hasn't always cared, but I feel like now he wants to be a part of the school experience. He wants to have friends. He wants to do the things that others do. He wants to go to the mall. So some days I can, some days I can't. But actually, just last week, I let him go with his cousins, no nannies, no adults, nobody.
Wow.
And he was so happy. He kept saying, I was so excited I did this. The problem with doing that is that when I'm around him, I can kind of control situations, because sometimes they end up being huge liabilities, because he'll just, Faisal will just say things or go, and some people will be happy, but a lot of people will just not tolerate it. So it's really, I'm protecting him, I'm not embarrassed of him, I'm protecting him from those people who would not even make the effort to understand. What I was hoping to teach him, because is to actually disclose, because once he discloses, then I'm able, it's almost like empowering in his case, to say it. So then people were like, okay, why is he repeating the same thing 20 times? Which is like, he'd go and have the most random conversation about, he really struggles with social cues. At this point, we are really struggling with what is so-called the hidden curriculum, because he doesn't know what's appropriate. He doesn't know when to stop talking about something. And that you can only learn that through practice. And unfortunately, we don't have a lot of opportunities.
So it's a vicious circle.
We don't have a lot of opportunities to practice, especially at that age. And without that practice, you can teach all you want. You can say stop all you want, but you're not providing that example, that opportunity, that situation.
You're not providing a buffer. You're not providing another solution for them to get what they want out of that situation.
I'm curious to ask also, like, if you are giving them a place to practice, kind of, or just like randomly with random people, how do you know how others are going to react? So you don't really know if it's.
And that's what it is. There's that anxiety. Some days you're willing to put up with it and take him along and just let him be, but you're there. I always have to be there and watching.
Do you mean for yourself personally as well, your anxiety levels?
I mean, of course, but his anxiety is my anxiety in the sense that, like, I don't like to see people making fun of my son.
No,
I don't like to see.
So that's your anxiety.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I don't like to see my son, and it's very triggering for me, because it's like, oh, where's the compassion? It becomes very, like, we live with this day and night. I don't care. Everybody must be accepting and must be more educated about.
I think it's interesting what you just said, actually, about not being embarrassed is being protective.
Yeah,
that's the thing, and that's it. It's like I think we've all lived with this for such a long time now. And when I say we've lived with it, we've lived with our children going through this through life with autism, and it's not like you feel weak or embarrassed, or it's like we feel like we need everybody to understand.
And you don't want to put your son in that situation. It hurts to see, that your son he's just trying to socialize. This is how he socializes. So I always say, listen, he has autism, and there's nothing wrong. I'm helping him when I do that, because it's like, oh, okay, now it makes sense.
Right.
He's actually very interesting. And then you feel most people are more willing to engage once they know. That's why I feel like sometimes disclosure is power, especially if he would be able to do that, because, you have no idea. He comes and talks to you about, the random situation over and over and over. You're like, but then when he says, okay, that makes sense, maybe people will be more compassionate. The problem is that people are not compassionate, because they're not willing. A lot of people, I don't want to generalize, but they're not willing to put in the time. They just don't want to deal with it. And I deal with that a lot. It's like, like sometimes with family, which is the harder thing. It's like, oh my God, how many more times can he repeat the same thing? Oh my God, and they get triggered, and it's like, I live this, and and you owe it. If you want to be around him, you're going to have to treat him and put up with this, because this is how he's wired. This is how he functions. And then maybe you can provide examples. And there is, and that's what I'm saying. Social skills are learned through practice. Our kids did not get the same practice that others did, because they developed at a different rate, and they developed in a different way, with different operating systems sometimes. And you know what? Doesn't mean that's not an excuse, especially with the growing rates, not to educate yourself. That's why it's so important for everybody to understand that autism is there, what it entails, and be able to almost like recognize and be compassionate. So for me, it's very triggering when I see kids making fun of my son. I almost want to go there, and I did it before. It's happened over and over, and that is my fear with social interaction. It's that my son gets bullied, is that my son gets hurt, is that he doesn't understand. Funny enough, in his school, a bunch of kids were, making fun of him literally, but he had no idea and he was laughing with them. And that was awesome because it completely put them in a situation.
Yeah, because it diffuses the situation.
It was like, why is he laughing? We're bullying you. And he's cracking up with them. He's in his own, he thinks it's hilarious. I was like, that's a great coping mechanism. He didn't even know, which is great. But like, it's not always going to be like that. They also have feeling. They can't read if they're being bullied or not sometimes, but it's still not right.
And in those situations, it can go the other way as well. It can wind the situation up even more, can't it? Especially if they don't understand the thing.
I think it's just like there's that hidden fear of what Hasna was just saying, that it's like, is this always going to be the same way? Like, how is it going to be when he's older? And that's you keep like that. It kind of stays at the back of your mind. So much anxiety about that.
So much.
So it's very stressful.
And I think we've talked about this before, but all of this fear and all of these anxieties, if they could stay at this age or a little bit younger forever, that would be kind of better.
Yeah, I know.
Because we can always protect them. No. And I think this is the sheer weight of the fact that we don't know what the future holds is almost too much to bear often. And this is why I think we're quite extreme with the way that we parent and what we think.
I also don't have
it's almost like faith. A do or die. Like
it is.
I don't have a lot of faith in people. Like, I think what I've been exposed to so far is that there's not a lot of compassion. No. There's not a lot of awareness. There's not enough efforts by the school.
It's effort. There's not enough desire to learn more.
The schools, even with these growing numbers, it's still the easiest thing to do for schools to just, say, sorry, we can't serve him. There you go. So, it's almost everybody is turning their backs on them. There's no activities for our kids. There's no opportunities. Our kids cannot access what the mainstream kids access. In terms of like after school, extracurricular, and after, I know that like more programs are happening around the world, but really the focus should be on developing programs that help with social interactions. Because what are you without the social? There are in the workplace. That's how there's trainings that are done to like employees where they can understand. But it's still, the need for that is huge. It's way bigger than what's available.
And I think as well, if we started that training sooner, so if we, just looking at the education system and how that works, if we could get to a point where some of the subjects and the topics and how far they go with education is not necessary for a lot of these individuals, because they will never become academics. They will probably never go to university. Some of them will, some of them won't. But if they're identified as potentially not being, at a point, not written off, but also take a different track. So take a vocational track, but at the same time, everyone, like there should be, like you say, a massive emphasis on social skills, so that when they do go into the workplace of their choice or what is suited to them, that they're already one step ahead. So that's something that they don't have to learn as adults. It's something that they can learn as children. Maha, when's a situation where you've had a crash and burn situation? Because I think that we have empathy for these things, but also there's always situations whereby you can remember and think, that did not go well. You always have a laugh about it.
The hardest ones have been the ones where he refuses to even go into the house. So I can't even enter the house, let alone. So I remember at one stage, we had a big celebration at one of my uncle's homes, and he, I have a very large family in Australia, and, none of them, the whole autism thing is like, oh no, it's really he just needs time. He just needs discipline. Right. His father needs to be stronger, whatever it is. Like and you just sort of filter that and you go whatever. And I think there was one time where, lucky my uncle lived across the road from a park, but because I just spent the whole time at the park and my whole family were inside eating and enjoying themselves, and I was outside with Zane, and my auntie would come out and go, it's okay. And I'm like, well, I can't really do any more than that, because I have another son who's inside. And I'm like, well, I can't leave. I don't want to pull my older son away because he's enjoying his time with his grandparents and this. Yeah. So I stayed in this park, and then the kids sort of came out and started playing with him, and then they'd go in and eat and come out. And it was like, can I just go home? Yeah. Like, I have one car, I can't leave one child with it. Yeah. So those and the thing is, with my son, up until the point that we reach the house, we don't know how he's going to respond. So on one
surprise.
Side, it's like a lucky dip. You're like, okay, today you're okay with it, but another time he might go there and say, I don't like the look of that house, and not go in. And
of course, as a mum, you sort of want to put on your mum hat and go, nah, you're going to listen to what I say and get in the house. But if only it was so easy with our kids to just lay down the law with our kids. It doesn't work that way. And so I think in that situation, and I didn't take him to a wedding until he was about 7, because I couldn't trust telling these people that I'm going to get all dressed up and get ready for this wedding and then not be able to go into the wedding. Yeah. So I would just say, he's not coming. I'll go. I'll enjoy the wedding. I'll take my older son, or I'll go with my husband. And and that was quite sad, because all the kids would be together, all dressed up in their cute little suits, and my son was at home with my husband, or with his dad, or with with my parents or something. And that was, I would love to have taken him to those weddings and had the little outfits on, but you just sort of, again, pick your battles and pick your into situations and go, it just isn't for him right now.
Do you feel that that's got easier with time? Not because he's grown up, but because you are more, it doesn't hurt you as badly now when you see that? Or people are more accepting now, or they just know him a bit better, so they know what to expect. What, like,
when you got more used to it.
Yeah,
I'm just numb.
I think I don't accept it. I just got used to it.
You definitely start to just accept that. I think the acceptance, we talked about the stages of grief, and I think when you reach that acceptance stage, you just sort of take it and go, not a good day, that's okay, let's go home, or let's go, you know what, let's just go to the park for a bit, let's go, because I don't want him, because Zany is very aware and he understands, so he then feels bad. He's at an age now where he's like he's apologizing for being this way, and I'm like, no, like, that's really, I don't ever want you to feel that you have to apologize because you can't, because he wants to socialize and he wants, so now it's like, it's okay. If you change your mind, that's okay. We can go. And so I always have a plan B in the back of my mind, so then it's not overwhelming for me. Before, I didn't have a plan B. It was, okay, we're going to go home and just lock ourselves away. Whereas now it's like, no, it's okay. Like, we can go home, we can go somewhere else, and that's okay.
You become less rigid and you become more flexible for them. And I think that's what it is. It's like we have to become flexible with like maneuvering situations. And
and I think as they grow, you kind of also start taking them more into consideration, in the sense that like, it's not that you always want to keep them comfortable and not give them a space to grow, but I think, like, for me, the learning curve I had to learn over the last year or two is to also realize, like, there are some kids that he gets along well so perfectly, where when we do have a play date, it's like, I don't even worry about it at all. Yeah. Whether they're at my house or we're at their house or whatsoever. So they just, like, there's no problems. It goes perfectly. But there are some kids where there are occasional issues. And I find sometimes when it's a bigger group, and there's more kids.
Yeah, because there's more opinions, there's more people. There's more,
and it becomes more difficult for him to have. So I don't avoid these situations completely, but I got to a point where, like, well, you know what? Everyone always is trying to do things that's like more fun for their kids or for their kids. Like, why would I force him to go into a situation that I know he would be at one point or another uncomfortable in? So I just kind of like, again, I don't avoid them altogether, but then I sometimes, like, if he doesn't, I'll ask him. If he doesn't want to meet with these people, then we just do something differently. Or, if it's not like a celebration where, it would be rude not to go, I would try to do that. But again, like, I would have, maybe iPad isn't the perfect plan, but it's there as a backup,
There's no shame.
Or we go for a certain amount of time, and then once we know, like, he's
reached his limit.
Yeah. So
we adapt, and honestly,
definitely.
I feel like instead of them always adapting to what works for us, we should also adapt to what works for them. And I'm right there with you when it says we don't want to keep them comfortable, and always sometimes you do want them to practice the skills and to be. But at the same time, I prefer when my son is in a situation he likes, and when
of course,
peace of mind for me, peace of mind for him, and people that are not judging him, and of course, you tend to gravitate towards that.
Yeah, and also I think getting to know our children, and as they've grown as well, it's easier to identify situations where they might learn from, rather than other situations where it might just be a totally uncomfortable situation that is just never going to work. It's always trial and error to begin with. But with social interactions, I find, obviously, because Noah's not particularly verbal. So he couldn't really tell us if he was uncomfortable about the color of someone's house outside, or he was frightened about who was, so we have learned to kind of read what it is that he, may get anxious about certain situations. But I always find that because he can't speak, so I know that he's not going to come out with something, the most that I get from him is might talk too loudly, or he'll talk when someone else is talking, and then he'll just keep repeating the same thing over and over again when someone's like right next to me, because he hasn't got that kind of social cue to just, I'm having a conversation, can you wait? And those are the things that make me feel quite anxious about new situations, especially if, because outwardly he doesn't look like he has autism. So if you walked into a room and there's so many people in there, that's what I get most anxious about, is the fact that I haven't got a problem with telling anyone, but when I haven't had that opportunity to have a precursor, like a conversation ahead of time to warn everybody, well, not warn them, but just let them know. So it's like, well, can we start off on the right foot here? Let's start off with the right information so that it's almost like you need to write them an email beforehand, right, just to say, can you, we're just telling you just ahead of time that this is how this interaction.
How annoying is it to have to do that? It's almost like you need to always over explain yourself to everyone. Like, why do we need to
so be frustrating there? That's the hard, that's awful.
And that opens the fact that really there isn't enough, call it awareness, except there isn't enough. And they speak about Autism Awareness Month, and we have this, but like people don't actually know. They can't. They can't recognize. And the moment that you pick it up, you can ask, or you can just, at least have some compassion, at least act, because, for me, it's like, what's so wrong with, I always have to go and like be worried. And if I didn't have the opportunity to disclose, it's a problem for me, because, Faisal will go all over and grab things and say things. And it's almost like, are you raising your son well? What's wrong with you? And that's when the judgment,
and that's when the judgment, and then I start sweating. Then, like, I am like, because it's not him, it's them, it's the situation. And then you don't like putting yourself in a situation whereby, like you say, you want to protect your child. And, any new thing that we go, we're walking into a space, then I'm kind of like, God, don't touch anything. Just don't walk away. Just stand there, because, if we're trying to have a serious even in the doctor's clinic, which is ridiculous, because sometimes, if we're in the doctors or in the hairdressers or wherever, it's just like, we just need to get out of here unscathed.
Just cut that hair.
Right, just
get
cut
me
the
out
hair.
of here. That's how I feel.
Even in the doctor's surgery, if you're with a doctor that doesn't know, and you're there for something totally different, you're in the nurse's station beforehand, and they're doing all the stuff beforehand.
That's a whole drama.
Oh my God. Now, he's putting the blood pressure thing on his arm, and it's like, and the thing's not working because he's moving, and they're like, don't move.
Can't you just do it?
Exactly. And it's like, no, like, and then I'm like, no, don't move, and he's like, don't move. It's like this, and it's like,
trying to get like blood, like trying for a blood test. Oh my God!
I'm so scared of that. We need to do that, and I haven't done that until this day, just because I'm scared
to be able to do that, and everything's so slow, and
the doctors get frustrated. Like, sit down. Why did I can't do it? I'm like, he has autism. What's wrong with you? Like, get over yourself. And he's like, oh, so sorry. I'm like, you're a doctor. You should know.
Recognize that.
And you're always on the defense. That's the thing.
Even in the clinic for the COVID vaccination. So the first, and I haven't taken Noah for any blood or anything for a couple of years now, thank goodness. So, lucky that he's not had to have anything like that. But he's big now, like he's bigger than me. So, and he's like, very often, he's so funny. So, very often I'll be sat in the chair, and he'll come for a cuddle with me now, and he dumps like his whole dead weight on me, and he's heavier than I am. So I'm like, I feel like quite a frail lady when he's around. And I was in the clinic going to get his first vaccination for COVID, and I was like, and I was writing on groups to try and find out whether or not they had a special area, because I was like, I don't know how this is going to go, but I do know how you're going to react. I don't know how my son's going to react, but I'm very sure that I know that this process that should take 2 seconds is probably going to take 20 minutes. By the time you've had a chat with your friend, the nurse, by the time you've opened the package and filled out the paperwork and done this and taken his blood pressure, he's going to be like, by the time, what are you doing? So we did the whole social story beforehand. We, watched some YouTube videos and everything else. So he knew exactly what was going to happen. But it was like, well, he was like waiting. So he was like, well, why am I, can we just get this done? Woman doesn't give a crap. But she's he sat there. In the end, I was like, look, he's got autism. Yeah. Can you hurry this along? And then she was like, yeah, it's fine. And the vibe just totally changed once she'd realised. But she hadn't taken the time to assess his behaviour. Because obviously, outwardly you wouldn't know, but he has got some behaviors that you can see that it's very obvious that he's an 11-year-old child that wouldn't sit regularly like one of my other kids would.
You have to just tell her her to figure it out.
And this is the thing, but like you say, it's not them, it's everybody else, even those situations. And it makes me feel so uncomfortable at times, not because of him, but because of other people's perception. That it does. And I think what helps in these situations, it helps me, is keeping a regular dentist, keeping a regular hairdresser, keeping a regular swim instructor, trying to keep all of this regular, because once you've done that introduction once, it's going to get easier after that first introduction, because once you've done it once, twice, our dentist now is absolutely amazing because she knows him, he knows her, he trusts her. The hairdresser, practice. It's all practice. So it's just keeping that regularity, and it stops. For him, it's good, but for me, it's even better because I can walk in and I don't have to explain. I don't have to introduce. I don't have to make that introduction again.
I don't have to then build their own relationship.
Right. But it's always, wherever it is that we go, and I think it's those first interactions all of the time. So, and it's almost like frustrating when we, even I was sat on an aeroplane. We were on a plane in December. And I wasn't sat next to Noah. My husband was sat next to Noah, and I was sat in the row ahead with the other girls, with the kids. But I turned around and I could see there were 2 kids, a line of 3 kids in the center aisle. And Noah was stimming with his hands on the plane because he was watching something on the telly that he was liking. And I'm like, fill your boot. On the plane, do what you want. Like, and they were watching and they were pointing. And he wasn't making any noise, he wasn't disturbing anybody, but they noticed it, and they found it absolutely fascinating, whether or not they were like teasing or whatever. And I was just like, this is horrible, and he doesn't care, he wouldn't even know. He would like face off, he would probably be like
when he was bullied.
And I turned around and I was like, is everything okay? And I didn't need to do that at all. And the parent was there, and I was like, I can't do this. And it's just
you need to teach your kids that.
Right. No, I didn't. But I was like, I just addressed the kids, and I was like, he's fine. And they were like, okay. This weird lady that's like looking at me. But it's just all of that the first time. And this is why I think that if every child is introduced and to exposed. Kids like our kids and exposed, then there will never be the staring and the this.
It's literally like therapy, because I kind of feel like whatever type of therapy you're doing, it's exposure. It's exposure, you're right. And over. So it's really like exposure.
It is exposure.
Everyone needs to go to therapy.
Like that's what we're trying to do.
Yes.
Opportunities to practice.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So ladies, what are your top tips for making successful and social interactions, not necessarily successful, but whatever you deem to be successful, and what makes you kind of your cup full, not half empty, and comfortable and less anxious? What are your top tips for navigating those situations?
I would say don't feel guilty if some days you choose an easy situation. You don't always have to be teaching new skills. Be flexible. but don't feel guilty if it's not always something that works for him. Just make sure you have enough patience. I think that's another, and that day, just make sure that it works for you and for him. Don't go into a situation when you're already going through a lot of, anxiety, and then add to it and feel guilty that you're not taking him, or that you're not doing that. Definitely go and expose your son. But that was a long top tip, by the way, but expose your child to situations.
Oh God, there's so many tips. My top tip, maybe find yourself an awesome group of friends that share similar interests, whether they have kids with autism or not, for your child to be to spend time with. You'll probably find that you will lose a lot of friends, and that's okay as well, because at this stage in your life you just go with what
Who needs friends?
Who needs friends? So overrated. So overrated. Like you realize, and then when you do pull away from those people, you'll be like, do you know what, autism was a blessing, because I don't really like you. Just don't know. It gives me the perfect, please use it to your advantage if you need to. So just being comfortable with the friends that you're with, and choosing your battles when it's okay to say no to certain social groups. That's fine. Do what you can. And
so my top tip for the day, I would say, is just kind of tagging along what you guys already said. Just be kind to yourself. And obviously, if there are situations, or if you need to create a situation for a teaching moment, that's great. But I think taking care of yourself first will put you in the right state of mind. And it's don't let the fear of what's going to happen, or just the exposure, just think whatever does happen, you can always turn anything into a teachable moment.
I'm never doing that again.
Yeah, there you go. You learned something. You learned a lesson. So again, be kind. If you're not in the mood, if you're overwhelmed, if you're whatever, that's absolutely okay to take the time to really rest and take care of yourself. But when you are up to it, go for it. Mm-hmm. Don't be afraid.
Great. My top tip is to keep your regulars. So wherever possible, and sometimes it's quite difficult, to keep your regular dentist. If you find a dentist that you like, keep that regular dentist. If you find a hairdresser that you like, all of those things. Just because for me personally, it alleviates a lot of my anxiety. If that first introduction is always difficult, just because my anxiety, not because of other people or my son, but because of me, because I've, my anxiety is heightened because I never know how it's going to go. So once that's done, you find somebody that you like, just keep maintaining that relationship, and you never know what might come of that. If you can get your child to a point where they become independently sitting in a hairdresser's because they know that person that's cutting their hair and they're doing a great job for you and everything else, then that's a relationship built, and that's independence. Same with the doctor, same with the dentist, all of those things where our children have heightened anxiety, which obviously leads on to us. If we can get to a point where they are becoming happy to visit these places, which tend to be quite a struggle for people, and they can do it themselves independently, and there's a relationship being built, and it helps them in later life to maintain all of these things that are really important as kind of life skills, then that's a great thing. So there we go. Okay, thank you so much for joining us today, and it's been great to see you. Great conversation. Thank you for joining us for this episode of This Life, Chronicles of Autism Moms. We'll see you again next week for another episode.